Yes, please.
I just want to make a really quick comment on international law and U.S. response to that, and how that might affect the practicality of the situation. In terms of international law, what they're talking about is universal jurisdiction, which is basically that they're talking about is the idea that international courts and certain governments have the, I guess, universal right to prosecute and arrest people for crimes that have been human rights abuses, genocide, things like that they're talking about in their country, and then give them over to international courts to try those cases, or try it on their soil. The United States, as a legal, our government is completely unsupportive of universal jurisdiction. We enter, a lot of international treaties, a lot of, like the ICC, the International Criminal Court, with the stipulation that our sovereignty trumps that. And we've passed laws about, how we basically don't really support universal jurisdiction, especially when it applies to our own government. There have been attempts to try, the U.S., United States members of the Army in other areas for abuses and, crimes in Iraq, and there have been similar, attempts to get George Bush and other members of, the administration to try for certain other, questions like that. And, the United States government just does not support universal jurisdiction. And we actually, I don't actually think we actively participate in the ICC right now, the International Criminal Court, which, is empowered by the UN and other treaties to try cases like this. And so in terms of, just how this might affect this situation, I would say that, the government we probably would not support, suing the Pope, because it would be, these kinds of precedents would, conflict with our historical assertion of our own sovereignty. So I would guess tentatively that would probably prevent the government from being very supportive of doing any cases that would threaten that.
Please.
Just to tag on the end, I think civil action should be taken at the local level. I kind of agree that if action is to be taken, that's probably where it should go, where the abuse actually happened, and maybe a little higher up than just the strictly local parish. But I just want to say that this might be an example of where even law and even litigation can sometimes be unsatisfactory to our sense of justice, and that some things that we hope we can get justice through the law, but sometimes we can't. And one thing, the Christian concept of forgiveness and reconciliation is one that, as a society, we should be embracing and really seek to actually repair relationships, and really seek to actually find forgiveness through these horrible, and not through them, but in the midst of these acts.
I want to just add anecdotally that my best friend was on the legal team to sue Cardinal Law civilly. Her response when she told me about the case is that it was one of the worst cases she was ever on, and that there are no winners. I'm going to move away from this because we're getting closer to the end, and there are 3 or 4 questions that are related. There are 2 that I want to get to. One of them is regarding Egypt, because it's so current. Before the fall of Mubarak, Egypt was one of the largest pro-Israel nations in the region. What role should the UN play in the rise of new states and the possible religious groups that may come to power, each with their own political beliefs? So again, the question was, what role should the UN play? Actually, we'll go all the way to that. Ibrahim?
I think the group that's on everyone's mind is the Muslim Brotherhood, and what role they would play. I think from what I know and from what I've read, the Muslim Brotherhood is not going to be running for the majority of the seats in the upcoming election. So I don't know what their foreign policy goals are necessarily, but if the question is in regards to their lack of support for Israel, or I would say, respect for the treaty that was signed at Camp David, I think the army, the Egyptian army, would recognize and hold up those treaties. So if that's what that's about. If it's not, I'm not sure exactly what the UN would do or how it would interfere with Egyptian or possibly Tunisian and Libyan affairs.
I'm going to fold in a part of another question, which is right next to it, I'm going to alter the question slightly, which is my prerogative. What about America's policies with regard to this? And so let me also say, one of the things that we're all celebrating is religious diversity, and America celebrates that diversity. With America's policies of rights to religious self-determination, when does it intersect with our foreign policy? And I'll open that to anyone that wants to jump in. If not, I'll call on you. I'll be professor.
I think a tricky thing, one of the tricky things involved with this is that in the region in question, religion plays a heavy role in the rhetoric. Religious rhetoric has a lot of sway with a lot of the people, and so it's sometimes difficult to tease out the religion from the politics. But what I think the original question about Egypt was getting at is, should we look to and support or maybe deny support to religious groups based on their support or lack thereof of other nations that we support? And I think what we ought to do in all cases like this is keep it secular. We shouldn't support any religious group and their rise to power because they are of a specific religious group, but rather because we feel, or the UN feels, that they will govern their nation well, that they will protect the rights of their citizens, that they won't attack their citizens in protests such as what's going on now. But I don't think that we ought to look to countries, and if there is, I don't think in Egypt you will see the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, but I think if that were the case and they were seeming to do so in a peaceful way and in accordance with the protection of the civil liberties and the rights of the citizens of the country, and they didn't seem bent on destroying nations in the region, I think it would be our obligation to respect the wishes and rights of the voters in the country as they choose their leaders. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to say about America's point of perspective on this, but speaking to the UN and bringing the Catholic perspective in, again, I guess, is the Vatican is a part of the UN, but we're a non-voting member, so I don't know if that's anything you were familiar with or not, but I think that's something we share in common. We share it with the UN is, this notion of human dignity, and I think that the UN makes this incredibly clear in their Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I'm going to have to agree that in that regard, as long as people are the human dignity of everyone involved in these areas is respected, and there aren't gross violations of human rights, then the UN isn't responsible to stepping in. And I think it would be hypocritical of them to say that just because this is a religious uprising of power, or if it were to be, hypothetically throwing this out there, and they were to want to somehow get involved, that would be grossly hypocritical of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
I'll first address kind of the U.S.'s role and what I think the U.S. will probably do. The political situation right now, I have very, 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 very strong doubts about whether the United States will get directly involved in Egypt. Right now the focus of our politics right now is the economy, and the domestic sphere of the economy and job growth. And, we are already involved in two very unpopular conflicts that, Iraq and Afghanistan are unpopular. They're draining on money and resources, and there's Barack Obama ran against being involved in them. Egypt is in a similar region. It's a very different country and a very different situation. Absolutely no question about that. But the political will ourselves and, you know, do anything about that. So there's no way the Obama administration will do that. It would be, the war would probably go similarly to Iraq and Afghanistan. It would be complicated. It would be, you know, nation building, and there's no political will to do that given our current economic situation and, you know, our history in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know what, you know, and I wish that, you know, the United States could help out, you know, different countries more, but, you know, I think it's better if we stay out of other countries, you know, unless something is, you know, unless if there's a UN or NATO coalition, and, you know, the Egyptian government asks us to come in, I think that's a very different situation. But I think the only way that, you know, we get involved is if the Egyptian government or the Libyan government or some, you know, representative that, you know, asks us and, you know, NATO or the UN to act, then I think that's a different situation. But unilateral